studio and welcome to Making Drums with Izzy. Today I'm going to show you how to make a drum with slabs and coils. Let's get started. The drum that I'm going to show you how to make is the Middle Eastern Darbuka, or also called doumbek. These are also referred to as goblet drums based on the shape of the form. We have a cylinder at the base and a big bowl at the top, hence the term goblet drum. To make the bowl, we'll use a hump mold. This one I made of plaster by casting it into a large bowl. And I made a smaller one for a smaller size drum, made the same way. And here you can see those images and videos for making the plaster forms. The next part is the neck, or the cylinder here. I'm taking a cardboard tube, just using a cardboard tube wrapped in paper so that the tube can slide in and out of the paper easily. This will be used to wrap a slab around to make the neck. Using the cardboard tube isn't necessarily a requisite for making the neck, but it does help to hold the form up as it sets up. So I highly recommend using these forms, especially when teaching this. And at the base of this drum, I have a couple extra coils to make the base wider. That's to help the drum stand up a little more easily on its own. Lots of these things can be modified and adjusted based on the shape that you want to make. There's no right or wrong way really to make these forms. But the hourglass shape gives it a certain type of sound, which is a bass in the middle and a high pitch at the rim. The size of the bowl will affect the sound of the drum. Mainly, a smaller drum has a higher tone and a bigger drum has a lower tone or a bass tone. Before we get going on the slab rolling, I want to point out that again we have a cardboard tube. This is 3.5 inches wide, and I plan to make my cylinder around that size, maybe a little wider. So what I've done is I've taken a flexible measuring tape and I've measured around the form. So measuring this, leaving a finger's width, that gives me 12 inches. And measure the neck, it's roughly 7 to 8 inches. And so what I've done is I've made a template for the form. So I cut a sheet of paper at 12 inches by 8 inches. And this is now a template for the cylinder that I will make and wrap around the form. So once I make the slab, I'll use this sheet of paper to trace it, and then I can wrap it around the form. And we don't want the slab to be too tight. We want it to be just enough that it slides out. This oyster piece of paper allows the form to slide out easily without sticking to the clay. The other thing we want to notice is how much slab we need. So we need a 12 by 8 inch slab. And then for this one, I'm going to measure across here. That's 11 inches. I need enough to go all the way around it. So I'm going to measure this, give myself 14 inches to go over the bowl. Now I'm not necessarily going to wrap it all the way down to the bottom edge. I'm going to wrap it, I'm going to push the clay around it until we get to about a ½ inch or an inch from the very base. Let's roll some slabs. Today I'm using an earthenware clay to build this form. Any clay will work for this, especially a clay designed for hand building. This is a clay of my own design. I like heavy grog for the work that I make, only for the texture and a few of the other qualities it might give, like reduced shrinkage, things of that nature. But I really love the texture of the groggy clay. So it's always best to wedge that clay before you roll it out on the slab roller. And now I'm going to prepare it for the slab roller. And that's ready for the slab roller. There are many ways to roll a slab. I'm using a Bailey slab roller here in my studio. And this slab roller allows me to adjust the thickness of the slab as needed with this dial right here. I'm going to roll my slabs at around 3/8 of an inch thick. As you begin to make these forms, you'll experiment with different thicknesses and arrive to what feels right to you. Here I have the prepared clay ready to go through the slab roller. I like to scrape over the canvas texture using a putty knife or a scraper. Next, I'm going to move the slab to this board. So the first thing I'm going to make here is the neck. And you don't have to make the neck first. That's just the part that I'm choosing to make first. So here I have my slab, my template for the neck, and then the cardboard tube with a loosely wrapped piece of paper around it. So now I'm going to take my template here. I like to use a ruler to mark it out. Okay, there, I have it marked out. And I can remove my template. I'm going to set this to the side. And now I'm going to cut it out. The top edges will have a straight cut. Cutting straight up and down with my knife. But the two side edges, which will be the seam of the cylinder, I'm going to cut at roughly a 45-degree angle in the same direction. So I'm going to hold my knife at an angle. I tend to do this in a couple of passes just to get it started, and then I can put my knife in there and cut it. So there, now I have the slab for the neck of the drum. Before I stand the slab up and turn it into a cylinder, I'm going to score the connection points. And now it's ready to be stood up. So now that I'm ready to stand the slab up, I want to have my cardboard tube on a bat, and I like to use a banding wheel so I can turn it. So now this is ready to set up. And now let's make the bowl for the top of the goblet drum. Here I'm going to use my 14-inch bat here and trace 14 inches. There, and that gives me the slab for the bowl. Now let's put that slab onto the bowl form. And now I'm going to cut the edge. So there's the bowl of the drum, the top of the goblet. Now we'll let these parts set up to just about leather hard. And now while those forms set up, I'll roll some coils for the next phase. Okay, now that the cylinder has set up a bit, I'm going to take it off the bat, flip it over. Just going to pinch this a little. This side is still a little soft yet. So this will be the bottom. okay. Now I'm going to give this some time to set up, and the next step will be to flip it over and to begin adding the bowl. Okay, now that these two parts have been able to set up, we're ready to attach the bowl to the top of this form. So this has had some time to set up, and I could still add to it if I wanted to make this a little bigger, but it's stiff enough now that I can flip it over. And this is stiff enough to stand up, but flexible enough to still score and add an attachment. So I could set this up on here and just trace the bottom if I wanted to. But since I've already got it placed back on the form, I'm just gonna take a quick caliper measurement and try to get it right there where I need it. So, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just making some notations here. So I know now where I want it. Gonna spin and scribe where I think it needs to be scored. So I'm gonna take my serrated rib here. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. So now the forms are ready to stick together. I'm going to add a little more slurry to this one. Dry it up a bit. A few more score marks through that slurry. And now I'm ready to add it to the top here. So again, this has set up enough. And then I want to spin it so I can make sure I have it where I want it, to make sure the bowl is relatively even. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to apply some pressure from the inside of the bowl down onto the cylinder. So I'm working from one direction around. And now I'll cut the inside out. I'll cut the hole through the bowl into the neck of the form. So now we're going to cut that hole out of the interior of the form. I'm going to start with a small hole and then cut it larger once I can see the inside. should take care of connecting the bowl to the base. So now that the bowl is attached to the neck, it's time to finish it. And to finish the bowl, we're going to build it up a little more and then round it off to make it a little deeper and to make the playing surface a little more hand-friendly. So we like to round this surface off, and then we're going to leave 2 inches of unglazed area to adhere the skin to. Now I've let this set up a bit, and then I'll finish the top. Now that the extra section of the bowl has had time to set up, I'm going to finish the top, rounding it off a bit and having a nice playing surface. You don't want this edge to be too rough. You want to keep it relatively uniform, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And with that set in mind, the shape of the drum doesn't have to be a perfect circle either. Almost any shape will make a sound, but a circle is going to be the best for having the drum head shrink and stretch around that shape most easily and most effectively. Next step, decoration. Now that the forms are finished, I'm going to decorate them with slips and underglazes. And I'll start with a layer of porcelain slip. And now that the pieces have color on them, I'm ready to let them dry. Next step is the bisque fire. Now that the drums are bisque fired, I'm going to put a clear glaze over the underglaze. This top area without the underglaze on it will be left unglazed so that the adhesive for the drum skins can absorb into the pores of the material. There, now that the pieces have been glazed, they're ready to go back into the kiln for the glaze firing. Remember, we want about 1.5 to 2 inches of unglazed surface to adhere the skin to. Now that the drums are glazed, we're ready to stretch the hides over the drum to create the drum head. The types of skins that we use for drum making can come from all different types of animals. In this case, we're using goat skin from Pakistan. I purchased my drum skins from Djembe Drums and Skins in Seaverville, Tennessee. And when you order skins from them, you want to specify thin goat skin. In this case, I'm using their Pakistani rounds that they supply, but you can also buy full goat hides that are from Africa. Pakistani rounds come already cut in a circle. And you can buy them on the thick, and you can buy them on the thin side or the medium side. In general, they come in a variety of colors. For this one, I chose this darker skin. Drum hides are different than leather because leather is tanned to be supple and soft. Drum hides are just hides that have been dried, and so the skin, like parchment, is very stiff. That allows the drum to have the sound that it has, from high-pitched tones to interior rumbles. Other materials that you'll need for this: large rubber bands, You can buy supersized bands from the hardware store. They come in a variety of sizes. I have a few of the green ones. These are 12-inch bands. And then there's also these silicone bands that you can order. You'll need some glue, a polyvinyl acetate glue. For this, I'm using this Tri-Bond wood glue, just simple interior use wood glue. Another great glue to use is Elmer's school glue for this. The polyvinyl acetate glue is a porous material glue, which is water soluble. Because we're going to be soaking the skins in water for a couple hours to make them soft and stretchable, we need a glue that can soak into the skin and also the pores of the clay. On the other hand, with another advantage to using the polyvinyl acetate glue is that when it comes time to rehead, if necessary, this drum head could be soaked in a pan of water, could be peeled off and then reheaded. For the smaller drum, I've got a piece of whole skin that I didn't use all of it. And this one has a couple of holes towards the outer edges, which is another reason it didn't get used. But it has just enough on it to be able to stretch this smaller drum. Before you soak the skin, make sure you can understand which side is the top and which side is the surface that should be glued. The skin will have a smoother or haired side. So here I can feel a few of the hairs, I can even see them. But the skin is smoother. On the inside, where the flesh was scraped from the hide, will be a little bit rougher. This should be the side that gets glued. Let's get it going. I'm going to use this scrap of skin that came from a full goat hide. And I'm going to draw roughly about 4 inches around it and then cut it out. You don't want to try to cut the skin to size right away because you need the extra skin to be able to stretch the hide across the drum. So I've measured roughly about 4 inches outside of the diameter of the drum, and I'll cut it there. Another thing to note here is that there's little bits of hair there. That indicates the outside of the skin. And then here you can see softer, sinewy sort of flesh surface that would indicate the inside of the skin. Another thing to note is the spine of the skin. Drum makers recommend that you use the spine across the center of the drum, as the skin will shrink and tighten more evenly. So now I'm going to soak the skin in the water. Depending on the thickness of the skin, this process can take anywhere from a couple hours to several hours. This Pakistani round has a little bit of hair on it. Some Pakistani rounds won't have any hair. This one The inside of the skin is noted by some softer, fleshy surface. The outside of the skin is noted by hair and a smoother skin surface. So I've got warm water in the bucket. I think it helps open the pores a little bit quicker so that the soak time is accelerated. You don't want to put anything in there, it's just water. We're not trying to chemically soften the skin, we only want it to be water softened. Once the bottom gets wet, then I'll be able to push it in. Now I'll let these drum hides soak for a couple hours. Now that the skin has had a significant amount of time to soak, we're ready to stretch the drum. Using our wood glue, I'm going to spread some over the top here. So I'm trying to get that whole space of unglazed area coated in a layer of glue. Next is to grab the skin. Remember, we want to use the haired side up, or the skin side up, and the fleshy side down. And I've also cut this rather large so I can have excess to pull on when I'm stretching the skin. No need to add any glue to the hide itself. And I'm sliding this over so I can get a little more of that spine centered over the top. It's not a bad idea to have a second pair of hands here to help stretch the rubber bands around the form. As I'm getting the rubber band in place, I'm also stretching and pulling the skin and helping to pull out some of the folds that occur, the folds and the wrinkles. All the while adjusting the rubber band so that it sits right on the side here. You want to be really careful here because it's easy to inadvertently kick the drum out from under your hands because we're trying to pull down relatively hard on the skin to tighten it. You can start to hear resonance there, and that's a good sign. So I'm really grabbing that skin to pull it down tight. Now, as this dries, the skin will shrink and it will tighten on its own. But we want to make sure that there's already an audible sound before we allow it to dry. So this is pretty close here. Pretty close to where I need it to be. And I'm about ready to let it dry. So you can see I have quite a bit of that glued section exposed. I've got my rubber bands flat up against it. And I've pulled super hard all the way around. And now there, now it's ready to dry, or at least to begin the process of drying. I'm going to take a wet rag, a dirty rag too, and place over the top. And this will allow this surface to dry and the center part to stay damp. And now it'll dry overnight. Now that we've given that glued surface time to dry overnight, we can remove the wet rags. and allow for the center of the drum head to tighten. This will take about another day of drying time. Now that the drum heads are dry and playable, it's time to remove the rubber bands and cut off the excess. So now that the skin is dry and playable, we can remove the rubber bands. And there's still some moist skin underneath. I'm going to give that some time to dry, and I'll come back and cut the excess off later. So now that it's had some time to dry at the edges, we're ready to begin cutting the excess. And so what I'm gonna do here is just lift that edge and see where the skin is still adhered or glued. Try to base some cuts on where it's not sticking. And that's the completed drum. Let's see how it sounds.